On this prequel episode, we've got our Holes follow-up polls. We're learning about vampires and previewing Interview with the Vampire. Do that on purpose?
We couldn't have.
I didn't.
It just happens to rhyme.
Hello and welcome back to This Film Is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. This week's episode, it's a prequel episode. We just said it before, mentioned it in the last episode. We're doing, for the Halloween season, for the spooky season, we are doing Interview with the Vampire. But first, we're going to discuss, we got a lot of feedback about Holes. Katie, what do people think?
All right, so we didn't get a ton of votes overall, but we got a lot of commentary.
Yes.
On our polls. So on Twitter, the movie won out. Yeah. Got 7 votes on Twitter.
Wild.
I know, big number. And the movie got about 4 of those.
Yeah.
And the book got about 3. So we had a couple comments from people. I'm not going to read all of the comments verbatim because that would take a pretty long time. Mm-hmm. But I'll give you the gist of it. At Dragon Babies Pod said, the first time I read Holes, I was completely transfixed, stayed up under the covers with a flashlight all night, which I will say is one of the best ways to read. Mm-hmm. I just want to put that out there.
Harry Potter agrees.
Yeah.
In the movies.
So they preferred the book. Dominic Shima also preferred the book. Mm-hmm. Said, I gotta hand it to the book. To me, it feels more nostalgic than the movie, and the narrative is a lot better than the actual movie, which was a lot of what we talked about in the episode. And then Scarface... good old Scarface, mm-hmm. and Shelby Suderman both preferred the movie. Scarface said the book is great, of course, but the movie to me is more entertaining. Mm-hmm. And Shelby said, while I recognize the movie has issues that didn't age well, I preferred the movie. Maybe it's because I read the book so I could follow it, but I preferred the pacing of the movie. So
interesting.
Yeah, kind of the opposite of how we felt about it, which is interesting.
That is interesting.
And then we had a comment from at Cinemuri.
Cinemuri? Yeah, I don't know how to say it.
Who said, the book doesn't have Shia LaBeouf and I can't read.
Those are 2 great reasons to pick the movie.
2 great reasons to prefer the movie.
How about on Facebook?
Over on Facebook, we got 9 votes, and they were all for the book.
Yeah, that's a wild difference.
I know. So when you combine it all together, the book won.
Yes. As it should.
And we got a couple comments from Ray Harper on Facebook.
Yeah.
He preferred the book. A lot of things about... like the extra details about with Stanley's inner thoughts, seeing him open up and kind of gradually gain confidence. Mm-hmm. They also mentioned a couple scenes that the movie had to cut, like some of Elia's experiences with New Life in America, some of the interactions with Mr. Sir and some of the other members of the camp staff. And he also brought up something that I thought was interesting. We talked about the joke at the end of the movie.
Continue. About John Voight's character being named Marion, and then one of the kids says, I didn't think that was a man's name, and then John Voight's character says, it isn't.
Yeah.
And then everybody goes, oh.
Yeah. So he thought that might have been a reference to John Wayne.
Which that's interesting.
Whose real name was Marion.
Yeah.
Which would make that more of an actual joke. Like
an inside weird joke.
Yeah.
It's still, to me, I went back and watched it again after seeing a couple people comment about that's how they took it. Not specifically the John Wayne thing, but specifically didn't take it as that John Voight's character was previously a woman. Mm-hmm. I still going back and watching it, the way John Voight's character says it isn't and has this look on his face feels to me like there's an implication there that It's not a man's name. Wink, wink, nod to the camera is kind of how it feels to me still. But this is an interesting... It's still weird and gross because it's like...
Yeah.
That's not a man's name, you punk. I get it in the context of John Wayne being this, epitome of, traditional masculinity and blah, blah, blah. Sure. I kind of get all that. It's still kind of weird, but... Yeah. I still read it the way I originally did. Because, like I said, I went back and watched it after we talked to April, and she didn't get that out of it. And then when I saw some other people commenting about it, I still read it the way I did. I think that's still feel like that's probably what it was. But this is an interesting take.
I think either reading, and either of these kind of 3 readings now that we have are all valid readings of it. It is, I think, no matter how you slice it, it's kind of an odd moment at the end of an otherwise very good adaptation. Yeah.
But it is, to bolster the claim that it's in relation to John Wayne, is that Jon Voight lost his first Oscar nomination for Midnight Cowboy to John Wayne, who won for True Grit, which I thought was an interesting little kind of extra bit of... So I can buy that.
Kind of a connection for those two actors. And then we had one comment over on Instagram from MJ Colwood, who said, "I'd say this is one of those rare occasions when the film honors the book," which I would agree with.
Yeah, we did the same thing, or we said the same thing, that it's a very much, pretty much a draw, but we just slightly prefer the book. Yeah. MJ Colwood marked it up a straight draw, but had to give it to somebody, and we went with the book.
They also said that they show the movie to their students every year, which is
fantastic.
Which is cool.
Awesome.
I don't know what class it is, but I hope they also read it.
Yeah,
because I think that would be...
Depending on the class.
Yeah, I think that would be an interesting unit.
Maybe it's a class specifically about adapting... it's an adapted
I would like to take that
screenplay class. Maybe, and then in that regard, but then you should still read it. But yeah. Cool. All right. That's it for our follow-up on Holes. Let's move on to learning things with This Film Is Lit and talk about the evolution of the vampire.
No matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world.
So I went a little bit ham with the learning things section.
Lots of notes I wasn't expecting. Last time I looked, there was a paragraph, and then I checked back an hour later, and there was 2 pages, and I was like, wow.
It's not 2 pages. Okay, sorry, maybe it's close to 2 pages.
It's pretty close to 2 pages. It's absolutely...
It's almost 2 pages.
Almost 2 pages.
All right, well, this was kind of in my wheelhouse, sort of, so...
That's fine.
All right.
I ain't mad about it.
So let's talk a little bit about vampires. So vampires, according to popular legend, a vampire is a creature that preys on humans, generally by consuming their blood. And vampires are found in lots of different folklores. Lots of different folklores have some kind of creature that has characteristics that are comparable to what we know as a vampire. Now, because there is a pretty long history within folklore of walking corpses, blood-sucking ghouls, that kind of thing, it is kind of difficult to pin down a distinct set of characteristics that we can consistently contribute only to vampires. Mm-hmm. It's kind of one of those things where you're looking at all these different things and you're like, okay, well, is this a vampire, or is this something different that just happens to share a couple of common similarities with a vampire? But I think we can come up with a couple of common recurring characteristics. Mm-hmm. So consumption of human blood or some other kind of essence or bodily fluid, sharp teeth or fangs more specifically, and having been somehow revived after dying.
Yes.
Are kind of our 3 big hallmarks of the vampire.
Yeah.
So creatures with vampiric characteristics are noted in folklore at least as far back as ancient Greece, probably farther if I had had time to do a little more digging.
Yeah.
But specifically, in ancient Greece, we had stories of creatures that attacked people in their sleep and drained their bodily fluids.
The only thing, and I don't know how far when these rate from, and you may get to this, but there was, I know, specifically in China or Japan, vampires.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's previous to ancient Greece or after. You know what I mean?
I don't know off the top of my head.
I guess would be after, but I don't know. I know those timelines.
I pulled that from Encyclopedia Britannica.
Okay.
So make of that what you will.
Right.
And then, of course, there's that kind of sticky place of like, are we considering this a vampire, or does it just have some common characteristics with what we would call a vampire? It can be a little bit hard to like actually nail these things down.
Right.
Anyway, we're moving into more of like what we generally recognize as like a vampire. We go to medieval Europe for that, with tales of walking corpses that drank the blood of the living and spread the plague. All over medieval Europe, especially during times of disease. Surprise, surprise. And there's been a lot of research done on that in the 20th and 21st centuries, where we're actually like looking at diseases that exist and saying, okay, maybe some people just had X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And that's where some of these like rumors come from. Like, for example, I'm probably going to mispronounce this. Porphyria.
I believe it's porphyria.
Porphyria.
I don't know if that's, I don't think.
Which can make you sensitive to sunlight. And then, like, you know, tuberculosis, which can cause you to waste away and, like, cough up blood. Rabies that can make you bite people.
For a very short period of time before you die.
Yes,
yeah.
But still. So we can kind of, you know, trace these instances of quote-unquote vampires walking around to actual legitimate diseases that people may have had. But of course, in medieval Europe, we were making it vampires because we didn't know anything about diseases yet.
Also, rabies causes aversions to water. Like holy water potentially could.
Potentially.
Maybe. I'm purely speculating on my ass right here, so don't.
So vampire myths were especially popular in Eastern Europe, and the word vampire most likely comes from that region of the world, like the actual word vampire. Now, the modern incarnation of the vampire myth actually comes not so much from folklore, but more from Gothic European literature in the 18th and 19th centuries, especially long-form poetry. We had examples like Heinrich August Ossenfelder's Der Vampir in 1748, John Stagg's The Vampire with a Y in 1810, and you know Lord Byron was going to be in here. He wrote The Giaour in 1813. The first known prose vampire story published in English is believed to be John Polidori's The Vampire, also with a Y, in 1918. When you want to be fancy, you spell it with a Y.
Yeah, I believe that comes from the old German.
Yes.
Probably, yeah.
When we're being particularly Gothic.
Vampire.
And there's a bunch of other examples. I also wanted to specifically mention Sheridan Le Fanu's Carmilla, which was thought to have been published sometime in the early 1870s, and which also established the vampire femme fatale character. And of course, we're not getting out of this conversation without mentioning Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Yeah.
The vampire story to end all vampire stories, and arguably the most important work of vampire fiction. And now I say most important work because a lot of the popular vampire characteristics that we recognize today, like methods of how vampires survived, how to destroy them, vampires being aristocracy, and even vampires being of Eastern European origin to some extent, were really solidified by Dracula.
Isn't putting people under thrall also from Bram
I
Stoker's
believe
Dracula?
so, yeah. Now, the novel itself is thought by some to have been inspired in part by, one, Vlad the Impaler, and two, Countess Elizabeth Bathory, which is a wild story. If you don't know anything about that, look it up. The rumor was that she murdered like dozens of young women and bathed in and drank their blood.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So sounds like a vampire, right?
Yeah. If you want to hear a little bit about the history of Vlad the Impaler, a podcast that I listen to that I find it's like comedy podcast, but it's called Citation Needed. There's several podcasts with a similar name. It's called Citation Needed, where they take like a Wikipedia article and they like deep dive a strange topic and make jokes about it. And one of the recent-ish episodes was about Vlad the Impaler. It was funny. So
I wonder if they've ever done Elizabeth Bathory.
I don't think they have, but I could recommend it.
She fascinates me. Because it's so interesting to me because, like, there's no way to really prove that she did any of that stuff because she was nobility, so it all got covered up.
Yeah.
But, yeah, that was, like, the big rumor was that she was trying to preserve her youth by drinking and bathing in blood. Fun times.
If you're looking for specifically for the podcast I'm talking about, I believe it's produced by Puzzle and a Thunderstorm is the company. They also do God Awful Movies and a bunch of other podcasts, but anyways, continue. Sorry.
All right. So moving on in our evolution timeline here, Dracula then in turn inspired, I'll use that term lightly, the silent film, it's Nosferatu.
Yeah.
I say I'm using inspired by lightly because it was basically Dracula with the names changed.
Yeah.
So that was 1922. But that's actually the first time we see a vampire depicted as being vulnerable to sunlight, according to Encyclopedia Britannica.
Yeah.
But it was actually so similar to Dracula that Stoker's estate sued for copyright infringement and won. And a court ruling ordered that all copies of the film be destroyed.
Oh.
But a couple of them did survive, and now it's regarded as like an influential cinematic masterpiece. So good on them, I guess.
No, it was destroy all copies of the film, not give them money. I'm glad damages are a thing now instead of just destroying art because it infringes on copyright.
I don't know how they'd be doing it in 1922.
Apparently they just burned it all.
All right, so chugging forward.
And just one more time to reiterate, Nosferatu is absolutely. I watched it in film school. It is an absolute classic of cinema and specifically of the horror movie genre. It's considered like one of the first horror movies of all time. So,
well, I've seen the screen cap of the vampire.
Yeah.
So he does look pretty horrifying.
Yeah, and they did a lot of really interesting things with sets and forced perspective and all this kind of stuff.
Interesting.
Really interesting.
I wonder how that would have turned out if they had been able to actually get the rights to Dracula.
Yeah, I don't know.
And hadn't just had
I don't remember enough
change
about
the
the
names.
movie. I don't remember enough about the movie to like know how similar it is, but
So now in the 20th century, we began to see like a change in how vampires were largely depicted in fiction, and it began to go from being depicted as like predominantly animalistic to displaying a broader range of more human characteristics. So we had examples like Ray Bradbury's Homecoming, 1946, which was a short story about a normal boy with a family of fantastic mythological creatures. We had Dark Shadows, which was an American soap opera. 1975, Fred Saberhagen wrote The Dracula Tape, which retold Dracula from Dracula's point of view. And then Anne Rice. And her sympathetic portrayal in the novel Interview with the Vampire, which we're talking about. So Rice's book was a pretty big turning point, actually, in the way that vampires are depicted. She was the first one to kind of do this, like, brooding, self-loathing vampire, with like an underworld with like political intrigue, and very like human-like qualities to her vampires. So we'll talk about it a little bit more under book facts, but Interview with a Vampire was pretty popular, and it kind of sparked this revival of vampire fiction. So subsequent vampire stories then continued to use the mythos that she had established, and from that, we get the vampire as the misunderstood romantic hero. So we have...
And boy, did we get a lot of it.
Boy, did we. We have... Buffy the Vampire Slayer,
yep.
And Angel,
yes.
and Spike. We have Charlene Harris's Sookie Stackhouse book series, which is the basis for the HBO series True Blood. Mm-hmm. We have the Vampire Diaries series by L.J. Smith, which was later made into a CW teen drama.
Yeah.
And of course, Twilight.
Yes.
Now, another 21st century creation is the vampire as the unlikely action hero. And it's a little less clear where that incarnation comes from, but I think it's possible that it also comes partly from Anne Rice, because her vampires do possess like enhanced speed and strength, which is something that we see a lot with the modern vampire.
Yeah.
So you have like Blade.
And that might be where that first started. I would have to see how far Blade goes back. Mm-hmm. Not to say Blade wasn't inspired by like Anne Rice and that sort of thing, but in terms of like
I don't
the
know
first
how
like
far back Blade
vampire
goes.
action hero, might be Blade, maybe.
We have Blade. We have the Underworld film franchise, and I think Buffy also fits into this category. Especially I think when you consider like the Angel spinoff, and he's more of like the hero of the story.
Right. The only thing you missed is the comedy spinoff. What We Do in the Shadows. And I'm sure there are others, but What We Do in the Shadows is fantastic.
What We Do in the Shadows, and that's kind of like lampooning the modern incarnation of the vampire.
But in a clever and interesting way, unlike Vampires Suck or whatever that terrible movie was. There was some like, I think Vampires Suck is like the same people who make all those awful like disaster movie, you know what I mean, where it's like
I know, like I recognize the title, but I can't like conjure.
I don't know
any
for sure that that's what it was. I've never seen it. I just remember it looking like that kind of like terrible like scary movie 6 or whatever, where it's or like disaster movie or whatever. But like just kind of jaded, played out jokes on.
When it gets big enough, people parody it.
Yep.
Not everyone does it well.
Nope.
So I'm going to go ahead and give us some homework this week.
Hooray.
Whether we're able to get to it in the actual episode or not.
I'm sure we will.
So if you're reading along with us, if you're watching along with us, I want to come back to this idea of connections to other vampire stories, whether they predate Interview with a Vampire or if they came after it. And maybe we can talk a little bit about what we think Anne Rice pulled from and what others pulled from her. Yeah,
cool. Sounds good. So that's your homework assignment. Go watch, I almost said What We Do in the Shadows. Watch that, but also watch Interview with a Vampire. But before you do that, stick around, get some facts about the book and some fun facts about the movie, and then go watch it.
What do you say we get started?
So you want me to tell you the story of my life? I'll tell you my story. I'll tell you all of it. I'm flesh and blood, but not human. I haven't been human for 200 years.
From the novel by Anne Rice. From Neil Jordan, the director of The Crying Game.
I've come to answer your prayers. Life has no meaning anymore, does it?
His name is Lestat.
Book fun facts, Katie. What do you have?
So Interview with the Vampire. And it is the vampire.
Yes.
I've been saying it wrong for like my whole life.
My whole life I thought it was Interview with a Vampire.
No, it's the vampire.
I had no idea.
It's a specific one.
Yeah, it's specifically Brad Pitt. But I still had no idea until literally when I looked it up today. Yeah. Or when you said, when I saw your book the other day from the library.
Yeah. So this is a gothic horror and vampire novel by American author Anne Rice. It was published in 1976. And this novel utilizes a framing device. It centers on the vampire Lewis, who is telling the story of his life to a reporter.
Yeah.
So we have the story of his life with interluding scenes where he's talking to the reporter.
Yeah.
And this is actually based on a short story that Rice wrote a few years earlier, which was about 30 pages long and written from the perspective of the reporter, of the interviewer, and not from the vampire. And she started reworking it later. So supposedly, it took her 5 weeks to complete the 338-page novel. And this was maybe my favorite fun fact that I found while I was doing research. Supposedly, she did research on vampires during the day and then wrote the novel at night. Supposedly.
There you go. Gotta get in. It's method writing.
Yeah.
As opposed to method acting. There you go.
She composed the novel shortly after the death of her daughter Michelle, who a lot of readers have identified as being possibly the inspiration for the child vampire character, Claudia. So the novel initially had mixed critical reception. Some people really liked it, some people not so much. A reviewer for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch.
Hey, that's our hometown. Well,
yeah.
my hometown.
What's my
You're,
hometown
yeah, sorry.
too?
Yeah. Sorry.
They gave the book a positive review and described the prose as hypnotically poetic in tone, rich in sensory imagery. However, Edith Milton of The New Republic wrote, "To pretend it has any purpose beyond suckling eroticism is rank hypocrisy."
That's both savage and a compliment. Suckling eroticism is if I was an author and I wrote a thing and somebody wrote an official review that had those two words together in it, that would be on the cover of my book. Suckling eroticism. That's it. Quote,
And
Edith
you know
Milton,
what?
New Republic.
She's not wrong. Close to halfway through, and she is not wrong.
There you go.
So it got mixed critical reviews, but it was pretty popular with the public. It spawned a total of 11 sequels, collectively known as the Vampire Chronicles, as well as a spin-off series called New Tales of the Vampires.
There you go.
Her vampire books also share a fictional universe with her series Lives of the Mayfair Witches and her novel The Mummy or Ramesses the Damned. So I have dubbed this the Anne Rice Literary Universe.
There you go. They could have done the dark. This sounds like they had the makings for the when they tried to do the whole
when
dark,
they wanted to do the dark universe.
The dark universe with the Mummy and
it was already right here, you guys.
Just Anne Rice and just boom, there you go. And then you can even capitalize on your next point. You can capitalize on that 50 Shades of Grey fan audience.
Because she also wrote the Sleeping Beauty Quartet, which is an erotic BDSM series.
There you go.
Got everything we need.
You got your softcore for the middle-aged moms for the get them in the theaters, and you got your dynamic cinematic universe. That crossover would be epic.
Get on it, Hollywood. I had a couple facts about Anne Rice as well because
I didn't mean to imply that erotic films are only for middle-aged moms. That was a joke. Plenty of people can enjoy erotic.
That was a dig on 50 Shades. I gotcha.
Yes, yeah, it was. And even that's unfair, but still. Well, maybe it's not unfair to that book series, but whatever. Sorry, continue. So
I have a couple things about Anne Rice herself, because I find her utterly fascinating. Yeah. She's like an author archetype. I don't know what I would call the archetype, but I think she is one. So Anne Rice was raised in a pretty strict Catholic family.
The evil queen archetype?
Maybe.
Dark queen.
But she became agnostic as a young adult, and then in the mid-2000s had a highly publicized return to Catholicism. in which she pushed aside her earlier work and wrote novels such as Christ the Lord Out of Egypt and Christ the Lord The Return to Cana. Obviously fictionalized accounts of fictionalized accounts of certain incidents in the life of Jesus as the Bible tells it.
Yep.
And then several years later, she again distanced herself from organized Christianity, citing disagreement with the church's stance on social issues. And apparently now she considers herself a secular humanist. So she's run the gamut, this one.
Yeah.
The other thing that I find really interesting about her is her stance on fan fiction, because it's kind of like an old school
Have we talked about this, or has somebody else talked about this?
We watched
somebody talk about this. Was it Sarah Z?
It was either Sarah Z or Lindsay Ellis. I think it was Sarah Z, though.
I think it was, too.
So she was, at least previously, adamantly opposed to fan fiction, and especially fan fiction based on the Vampire Chronicles. She actually at one point requested that fanfiction.net, which was the big place back in the day, remove stories featuring her characters. Now, supposedly, she has softened on this more recently. In 2012, Metro quoted her as saying, "I got upset about 20 years ago because I thought it would block me." I'm assuming she means writer's block here. However, it's been very easy to avoid reading any, so live and let live. If I were a young writer, I'd want to get my own ideas. But maybe fan fiction is a transitional phase. Whatever gets you there, gets you there. Which is still a dig on fan fiction.
It's still a bit of a middle-aged take to be like, you know, it's a bit of a curmudgeonly take to be like, well, you know, fine, I guess, but like it's not real writing.
Yeah.
Like, okay, cool. But you know,
we
it is funny
disagree with that for the record.
Yes, we both do. It is interesting that it makes sense to me though that it completely. I find it very telling and fitting that the time periods here completely match up with this previous paragraph you had. So. She released a statement in April of 2000, disallowed all such efforts, citing copyright issues. Basically condemning fan fiction in 2000, and that's when she started her turn to writing a bunch of Christian literature and got real big into the church. And then, come 2012, around the same time, she decided, nah, I ain't about that church life anymore. Was like, I guess fan fiction's all right. Like, I feel like there's an interesting. Commentary on sort of the...
It's an interesting coincidence.
Yeah, about the sort of personality types, and not always, but, you know, it's just interesting that those things seem to line up in her life there. But anyways.
All right, well, those were all the book facts and Anne Rice facts
there you
that
go.
I had.
All right, that was it for book facts. Let's move on and talk about the movie.
You're a vampire. You never knew what life was until it ran out in a red gush over your lips.
I can't stand this any longer.
You made us what we are, didn't you?
God kills indiscriminately, and so shall we.
You like dying? You condemn me to hell! Monster.
One happy family.
Take her, Louis. End her suffering and yours. For do not doubt, you are a killer. I want some more.
Interview with the Vampire, the Vampire Chronicles, which I did not realize.
Oh, I didn't realize.
I don't think it may have been
either.
released that way. I think that may have happened come a thing we'll talk about later. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a 1994 film directed by Neil Jordan, most famously the director of The Crying Game, which, boy, I've never seen that movie. I know the twist at the end, quote unquote. I
don't know
real
about that.
interested to see. I'd be really interested to see. I think that might also be based on a book. I'm not sure. Really interested to see how that holds up socially in the current. Again, I know nothing about it or what the message or where it goes or anything other than like the vague twist at the end or towards the end, but it seems very problematic. Also directed Michael Collins, which was a Liam Neeson film about an Irish rabble-rouser kind of guy. And more recently, in 2018, he directed a handful of episodes of The Borgias. The Borgias, which is historical fiction or, whatever.
Fictionalized history.
Yeah. The movie was written by Anne Rice. It was also co-written by the director Neil Jordan, but he did not get a credit on it. But it was primarily written by Anne Rice.
I didn't realize she did the screenplay.
Yeah. And she got the only writing credit for it, even though, again, Neil Jordan supposedly was involved. The other thing she wrote is Queen of the Damned, which I did not realize until literally today when I was doing this research, is also from the Vampire Chronicles. Yeah. And I believe that is when they added, potentially, the subtitle to this movie, Interview with the Vampire. Probably around the time Queen of the Damned came out, they may have slapped retroactively the subtitle, The Vampire Chronicles,
so that people would know they were
related them. Because it still did not work on me. In my head, this movie has always been called Interview with a Vampire. That's it.
Yeah.
I didn't even have the title right, let alone have the subtitle. And I had no idea that Queen of the Damned was related at all.
It's all in the Anne Rice literary universe.
Yeah, and famously, Queen of the Damned is not particularly good. I believe it's Aaliyah's last movie. It was right before she died, and she plays the main character.
You know what? At some point, we could do that and cross over with Good, Bad, or Bad, Bad.
So the plan. Well, I'm going to talk about it. We're not going to announce it here, but I have plans for all of this.
Okay,
we're going to do a thing. We're going to do a thing. Okay. So stay tuned for details, but you'll see.
We're going to do a thing, you guys.
We're going to do a thing, but you'll see. It stars Brad Pitt, Christian Slater, Tom Cruise, Thandie Newton, Kirsten Dunst, Antonio Banderas, and more.
Quite the cast.
I believe it might be Kirsten Dunst's first role.
I think that's
she's
right.
12 in this movie.
Or one of her first roles.
She was supposedly found by the casting director, and the only person they auditioned or something. And she plays the Claudia, the young vampire you mentioned earlier. The rights to Rice's novel were initially purchased by Paramount Pictures in April of '76, before the book was even published. But the script spent years, decades in development hell before finally ending up with Warner Brothers. It went through a couple different companies. Nobody kept being, in development forever. Finally, Warner Brothers got it. They called Neil Jordan, wanted him directed, which he was intrigued by the script, and he called it a really interesting and slightly theatrical screenplay. He was especially interested, though, after he read the novel. The themes of Catholic guilt, which pervade the novel, attracted Neil Jordan.
That Catholic guilt.
It attracted the director, Neil Jordan, who called the story, quote, the most wonderful parable about wallowing in guilt that I'd ever come across. But these things are unconscious. I don't have an agenda, end quote. So don't ever say I don't have an agenda as an artist. That's stupid, I think, but whatever. I feel like he was trying to play both sides there, be it's about Catholic guilt, but also I don't have an agenda. It's a good movie. Go see it. It's probably on a press junket or something.
Yeah.
So David Geffen produced the movie, big name producer, and the movie was given a $70 million budget, which in 1992 was completely unprecedented for a film that's a vampire genre film. Mm-hmm. Completely unprecedented to have a budget. That's a big budget. That's a fairly large budget even today.
Yeah.
$70 million. Anne Rice met with Tom Hanks to take the part of Lestat after seeing his performance in Philadelphia.
Oh, that sounds weird.
Yeah. I don't know if I pronounced that right, by the way, but Lestat.
I think it's Lestat, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
That's how I've been saying it in my head. Okay. But I guess we'll find out when we watch the movie.
But Tom Hanks turned the role down, turned it down in order to star in Forrest Gump, another movie we'll do eventually. After they talked to Tom Hanks, Anne Rice wanted Julian, I don't know how to pronounce this guy's name, Sands. He's a British actor, probably most known from Room with a View, but was also in The Killing Fields, Arachnophobia, and a bunch of other stuff. He's not if you see him, you might recognize him if you've seen some of these movies, but he's not a big famous actor to play Lestat. But the studio didn't think he had the star power, as I mentioned, so they went with Tom Cruise instead. And Tom Cruise received a record $10 million salary and a percentage of the profits of the film to be in this movie.
That guy's agent is...
Yeah. And this is, now this isn't even Tom Cruise at the peak. This is Tom Cruise at the beginning of the peak. This is post Top Gun and, he's big at this point, but this is pre-Mission Impossible. This is pre... some of his other big movies. I think it might be pre-Jerry Maguire. or right around Jerry Maguire. I don't know exactly. I think it might be pre-Jerry Maguire. So, yeah. But he was already in Top Gun and that sort of stuff. So, anyways. Initially, Anne Rice hated Tom Cruise for Lestat. She offered the studio a bunch of other actors to play the role. And like Jeremy Irons and like all these different people. She was like, this person, how about this person? And eventually she got to the point that she just suggested that Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise switch roles. She was like, I tried for a long time, this is a quote, I tried for a long time to tell them that they should just reverse these roles. Have Brad Pitt play Lestat and have Tom Cruise play Lewis. Of course, they don't listen to me. She eventually, though, did change her mind after she saw the movie and saw Tom Cruise in the role. She actually called Tom Cruise to apologize and compliment him for his performance. And she had a quote about how he inhabited the character in a way she did not expect, and as soon as she saw him on screen as the character, it clicked and it worked for her like perfectly. So you never know.
This is why she fascinates me.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Truly fascinating. So in some of the scenes, Tom Cruise was placed on an elevated platform to reduce the height difference between his character and other vampires.
My God.
Now, I will reiterate, as I always do, some of these facts are from the IMDb trivia section, so you never know how true those all are, but this seems reasonable.
This seems pretty reasonable.
Also, originally, River Phoenix was cast for the role of Daniel Malloy. I don't know who that is in the movie, or in the book or movie, but River Phoenix passed away 4 weeks before filming started. After that, Christian Slater was cast, and that's who plays the character in the movie. And I thought this was kind of cool and interesting. He donated his entire salary from the film to River Phoenix's favorite charitable organizations. It was like not a ton of money, but it was like $250,000 or something, and donated all of it to charities that River Phoenix was involved in or whatever. So the special effects were done by Stan Winston Studios. Stan Winston famously did a lot of special effects in Jurassic Park, Terminator 2, Judgment Day, and a bunch of other stuff. And he designed the characters' vampire appearances and makeup effects. This included a technique, and this is fascinating to me, where he stenciled the blue veins onto their faces. But in order to do this, the actors were hung upside down for 30 minutes, so the blood would rush to their heads, and then their veins would protrude, and then they could then trace, the makeup artist could trace the veins on their face with the makeup to like match the actual veinage of their face, which is...
That's wild.
Seems highly unnecessary, but there you go. Sure. You can just know vaguely where veins are in a face. But okay. And then, after seeing the film, Anne Rice was so pleased with the adaptation that she took out a 2-page ad in both Vanity Fair and the New York Times and endorsed it as a masterpiece. So...
I love her. That's such a melodramatic move.
Yeah. Wow, she loved it. She thought it was great. So I'm interested to see how you think it compares, because the author was like...
Yeah.
Brava.
I'm excited.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested to watch the movie. Like I said, I've never seen it. One of those ones that's kind of always been, you hear people talk about, it's always been on a list of like, I should watch that one day, and just never got around to it, because it's just, not really like, in particularly like one of the genres that I normally would watch. But I am really looking forward to watching it. So yeah, we don't know if it's available anywhere. We haven't looked.
I haven't looked yet.
Hopefully I know it's available to rent for like $4 on Amazon, but hopefully it's free somewhere. We'll see. Probably on like HBO or something. Which would be my guess. They tend to be. Anyways, if you could do us a favor, as always, go ahead and check us out on all the social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Goodreads, all those good places. You can comment and tweet at us and tell us what you think about the different adaptations, and maybe your comments will get read like they did at the beginning of this episode. Also, if you could do us another big favor and go out and rate and review us on iTunes, primarily iTunes, but anywhere else you can find our podcast and download us. It does a great service to us, gets us out there even more, gets us shared around, which is fantastic. I guess I'll announce it now at the end. What we're going to do, we're going to start a Patreon. It's going to be a little bit. I just want to throw it out there in this episode to see if less people listen to this anyway. So if we don't follow, we're going to follow through. But we're going to have a Patreon. Haven't figured out all the details of it yet, but that will be coming in the next few weeks, if not month. And I think one of the things we're going to do for that will be one of the levels, is a monthly-ish review of terrible adaptations, like Queen of the Damned.
Okay.
So we'll do a separate patron-only thing that is some of those bad movies. on top of our normal episodes. Not that we can't ever do bad movies in our normal episodes, but that will be its own separate thing. We'll go find the worst of the worst adaptations and talk about those. For patrons only, they'll be similar to kind of like good, bad, or bad, bad type thing. Obviously no video. So, look forward to that, and we'll figure out the rest of the details. But that will be coming soon. There's your little tease, your little preview. But yeah, look out for that. And until next time, guys, gals, non-binary, and everybody else.
Keep reading books.
Keep watching movies.
And keep being awesome.